My Sister Sam was an American sitcom that premiered on CBS in October of 1986. It starred Pam Dawber, best known at the time for her role in Mork and Mindy, as a freelance San Francisco photographer whose life is turned upside down when her out-of-state younger sister shows up and needs to move in. The role of Dawber's on-screen sister was given to a relatively unknown 18-year-old actress from Oregon named Rebecca Schaeffer. Born in 1967, Rebecca was an only child in the light of her parents' life. Her father, Dr. Benson Schaeffer, worked as a child psychiatrist while her mother, Dana, was a writer. Both were devout Jews and raised their little girl to strictly uphold the family faith. And for a while at least, it seemed like that faith was going to dictate Rebecca's path in life. According to her mother, Schaeffer was extremely active in their synagogue growing up, and at one point during her teenage years, even floated the idea of becoming a rabbi. However, there was one career path which proved to hold an even stronger calling for Rebecca: modeling. Her journey into the world of modeling officially began after her hairdresser recommended an agency to her when she was around 16 years old. Over the next year, she'd appear in several local adverts and even landed a couple small roles in television commercials. In the summer of 1984, she took an internship to New York City, and by the time she returned home, she was 100% sure that her future lay within the modeling industry. She then made a very difficult request of her parents: allow her to move to New York and live on her own while pursuing her career as a model and completing her final year of high school simultaneously. Always trying to support their daughter's dream, her parents agreed despite having some personal reservations. Rebecca soon packed her things and made her way to the Big Apple, where it didn't take long for the bright lights and romantic veneer of the modeling industry to begin to dull. Schaeffer found herself splitting an apartment with multiple other women who were also aspiring models. The environment of New York City was also much different than Rebecca was used to. According to her mother, during her first week, she was groped by a man on the sidewalk while she was simply walking down the street. Her daughter's response was giving the perpetrator a thorough introduction to her fist. She may not have been from the big city, but she wasn't some helpless small-town girl either. Rebecca had plenty of fight in her, and she wasn't going to let someone treat her however they wanted. This fiery spirit would be needed in the career challenges she was about to face. Work was hard to come by, and the criteria on which she was judged had now become much harsher than she was accustomed to. At 5'7", she was considered by most modeling agencies to be too short, and as unbelievable as this might seem looking at pictures of her, was also considered overweight at the time. But Rebecca took the challenges in stride and tried to keep a positive attitude. Hoping to shake things up a bit, she moved to Japan after she finished high school, hoping that her prospects for work might be brighter there. This unfortunately didn't pan out, as Japanese modeling agencies shared their American counterparts' sentiment. The crushing reality for Rebecca Schaeffer had finally set in. Fairly or unfairly, it seemed as though her modeling career wasn't meant to be. Returning to New York, she decided it was best to refocus her efforts on acting, a decision that paid dividends almost immediately. She landed minor roles in several television commercials before getting a bit part in the daytime soap operas One Life to Live and Guiding Light, while also getting a part-time role in the made-for-TV movie Quarterback Princess, which starred a very young Helen Hunt. This led to her being offered a 3-year contract to star in another soap opera titled Loving, all just a few months after moving back to New York. She declined this, theorizing that if she were able to land a 3-year contract offer so quickly, she could probably hold out for something that she was more passionate about. That opportunity would come with My Sister Sam. The show was about a hardworking freelance photographer named Samantha Russell, played by Pam Dawber, whose life is thrown into chaos when her carefree 16-year-old little sister Patty Russell, played by Schaeffer, is forced to move in with her. For Rebecca, having the opportunity to be a co-lead in a primetime sitcom was much more enticing than background roles on a soap opera, and she was hoping this would be the spark that would begin her long career. She flew out to California for the audition and knocked it out of the park, then decided to move in with her co-star Pam Dauber during the filming of Season 1 before eventually purchasing her own apartment in West Hollywood. My Sister Sam premiered on October 6, 1986, and garnered a very respectable audience, even beating out much more established shows like The Facts of Life by the end of their first season. Schaeffer in particular saw the biggest boost to her celebrity profile, earning an appearance on the cover of 17 magazine as well as multiple offers for small roles in movies. It wouldn't be accurate to say she was a superstar or anything, but she was definitely becoming noticed both by Hollywood executives and fans. She began receiving fan mail, particularly from young men. It was mostly harmless, run-of-the-mill stuff, asking her if she would date them or just saying how big of a fan they were of the show. However, it would be one particular fan by the name of Robert Bardo who would change the course of Rebecca's life forever. Growing up in Tucson, Arizona, Robert Bardo, the youngest of his parents' 7 children, was never quite given a chance at a normal life. Coming from a long family history of mental illness, Bardo was diagnosed as bipolar when he was still a child. It is also believed that he suffered sexual abuse from a male relative around the same time, and later was committed to a psychiatric hospital after threatening to take his own life. People who knew him described him as an angry man who would lose his temper for seemingly no reason and often threaten violence, even going so far as to call him a psycho. In his teenage years, Bardo also developed what he later described as a, quote, obsession with the unobtainable. He would develop intricate fantasies about girls he saw on television. And this wasn't run-of-the-mill having a celebrity crush like almost everyone has at some point in their life. This was much more dark and twisted. Bardo would genuinely begin to obsess over these girls, and in some cases even convinced himself that they wanted to date him. This began when he was just 12 years old, with his first celebrity obsession being a young girl named Samantha Smith. Smith gained worldwide notoriety when, in 1982, at the age of 10, she wrote a very adorable letter to then-Soviet leader Yuri Andropov asking for peace between the Soviet Union and the United States. Andropov actually replied to the letter and sent the little girl an invitation to Moscow, which she accepted. It was a huge thing in the news and a nice feel-good story at a time where US-Soviet relations seemed to be at a bit of a turning point. Bardo became utterly obsessed with Smith. He collected every newspaper clipping he could find featuring her, and recorded her interviews so he could later watch them over and over. He attempted to try and contact Smith, but these attempts were fruitless. At the ripe old age of 12, he began forming a plan to try and stalk the girl. Fate would put these plans on hold, though, as in the summer of 1985, the 13-year-old, dubbed America's Littlest Diplomat, was tragically killed in a plane crash. The, at the time, 15-year-old Bardo moved on to new infatuations. These included pop stars Tiffany, Madonna, and Debbie Gibson. However, none of these had quite brought the depths of obsession out of Robert that Smith had. That is, until he discovered Rebecca Schaeffer. Bardo found Schaeffer shortly after the premiere of My Sister Sam, and the infatuation was clear from the start. Bardo would record every single episode of the sitcom and watch them obsessively, his brain crafting these deeply intricate fantasies where he and Rebecca were dating and living together. He sent fan mail for her to Warner Brothers early into My Sister Sam's first season. It was a very long-winded letter, which went into great detail about how amazing he thought Rebecca was and how much he enjoyed her work. He confessed to her that he also dreamed of becoming famous, which led him to empathize with her character of Patty Russell, who also daydreamed about Hollywood. He included song lyrics from John Lennon on the letter and a cassette recording of some rock songs he had been working on. Schaeffer received the letter and actually thought it was pretty sweet. Don't get me wrong, she had no intention of meeting this guy. The young man had clearly developed a massive crush on the character she played and seemed unable to grasp the fact that she wasn't actually Patty. But as far as fan mail went, it had been rather polite, and Bardo came off more like an overly engrossed fan than someone who was a threat. As a nice gesture, Rebecca sent him a signed glamour photo of herself with some generic words of encouragement on the back. This was a fairly common practice back then as a way of just thanking the person for being a fan. It wasn't anything overly personal, and was essentially the equivalent of a YouTuber hearting a comment and thanking you for watching. But for Robert, it was much greater than that. Convinced that he and Rebecca were meant to be together, he took a bus trip from Tucson to LA in the spring of 1987, while My Sister Sam was filming the latter episodes of its first season. When he arrived, he went to a florist and bought an expensive bouquet of flowers before showing up to Warner Brothers Studios and attempting to gain entry. He explained that he had brought flowers for Rebecca and asked to be let inside to see her, a request that CBS security denied before asking Bardo to leave and telling him not to come back. Undeterred, he began writing obsessively to Schaeffer over the following months. My Sister Sam finished its first season as the 21st ranked show on television, a very respectable ranking by any metric you want to use. It was renewed for a second season, which began filming in fall of that year. Confident the show was a winning formula, CBS decided to move it from its regularly scheduled time slot and put it in direct competition with rival NBC's The Facts of Life. On the surface, this seemed like a good idea, as My Sister Sam was the higher rated of the two shows and theoretically was poised to win a direct competition. However, it wasn't going directly against The Facts of Life during its first season. In fact, it had the luxury of being sandwiched between two of CBS's most popular sitcoms at the time, Kate and Allie and Newhart. This was and still is a common practice with new shows. Put them on the same night as a popular and well-established program so you have the most amount of people you can to potentially watch it. My Sister Sam greatly benefited from people who would watch both programs, as after Katie and Allie aired, they were unlikely to change the channel to something else just to have to switch it back when Newhart came on. For its second season, though, it was asked to stand on its own while going directly against The Facts of Life, and the results were disastrous. My Sister Sam saw its ratings basically evaporate, falling from the 21st show on television to not even making the top 100 at the beginning of its second season. The ratings bloodbath caused executives to suspend airing of the show just 6 episodes into season 2, but not outright cancel it. After going back and forth on what they wanted to do, it was decided to try re-airing the show in the spring of 1988. After 4 episodes, though, and no improvement, it was decided to pull the plug. My Sister Sam, a show that seemed brimming with potential just 1 short year ago, was now canceled, another victim of the cruel and unforgiving world of primetime television. Schaeffer, now technically unemployed again, rapidly began chasing down parts, and was able to get quite a few supporting roles in various films, enough to keep her bills paid and food on her plate. She moved from Hollywood Hills to Fairfax, ironically because she felt it was a safer area. Throughout the rest of 1988 into early 1989, Bardo's obsession seemed to fade as his letters to Schaeffer subsided, perhaps largely due to My Sister Sam's cancellation. But make no mistake, his possessive attitude towards Schaeffer hadn't gone away, and it was going to rear its head again soon, with deadly consequences. One of the roles Schaeffer had secured in the aftermath of My Sister Sam's cancellation was a part in the 1989 black comedy Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. In one particular scene from this film, there is a quick shot of Schaeffer laying in bed with one of the male characters, with the clear implication being that the two had sex the night before. Bardo saw this in early 1989 and became absolutely enraged by it. The innocent and pure young woman from My Sister Sam was gone, and Schaeffer had now become, in his words, another Hollywood whore. Robert felt betrayed by Rebecca, as in his delusions, He believed she was meant to be with him and had now been made unclean by another man. He was angry and felt it was within his right to take revenge on Rebecca for betraying him in such a way. He began studying other celebrity stalkers, and even wrote to John Lennon's killer Mark David Chapman, who was now in prison, asking him what life in prison was like. Bardo found out that a man who had previously stalked and attempted to murder actress Teresa Saldana had been able to obtain her address via a private investigator. Robert saved up $250 working at Jack in the Box to pay a private investigator in California to locate Schaeffer's address via DMV records. Yes, as unbelievable as it sounds, getting the address of a complete stranger was really as easy as just going to the DMV and saying the right things to the people who worked there. The state of California would later describe this as a complete failure on the government's part to protect their citizens' information. In the weeks leading up to his planned trip to confront Rebecca, Bardo also asked his brother to sign off on a purchase for a .357 revolver. On July 18, 1989, Robert put his plan into motion and arrived in California early in the morning after taking a bus trip from Tucson. Rebecca was preparing for an audition that morning for The Godfather Part 3 and was already up getting ready. Robert knocked on her door, and when she answered, he showed her the signed photograph she'd sent him almost 3 years ago. He also told her he was disappointed in her choice to take a role where she was shown laying in bed with a man. Bardo said upon realizing why he was there, Rebecca became very irritated and asked him firmly to leave and never come back before shutting the door in his face. Robert left, then went to have breakfast, where he said he became very angry at how rude Schaeffer had treated him, saying that, as her most devoted fan, he didn't deserve to be talked to that way. When he was done eating, he called his sister from a payphone and told her that he was about to do something that was going to send him to prison for the rest of his life. His sister tried to find out where her brother was calling from, so she could contact police and stop him, but unfortunately he hung up on her before she could do that. He then returned to Rebecca's home, where she again answered the door, quite angry. But before she could ask what he was doing back, he pulled out his gun and shot her several times in the chest. Schaeffer collapsed in her doorway, with her final words to Bardo simply being "why," before she succumbed to blood loss and died at just 21 years old. Robert then fled the scene after neighbors who'd heard the gunshots came outside to see what was going on. Supposedly, he'd brought a copy of Catcher in the Rye with him as an homage to Mark David Chapman, which he threw on a nearby roof as he fled the scene. As news broke across the country that Schaeffer had been shot, Bardo's sister immediately feared this was her brother's doing and contacted LA police several hours after the shooting had first occurred. By this point, Bardo had returned to Tucson, where he was soon detained by police after he was found wandering aimlessly throughout highway traffic. He was arrested and extradited to California, where he was charged with first-degree murder. Robert Bardo went on trial for Rebecca's murder in early 1991. His defense team conceded that he'd been Schaeffer's killer, but argued their client was mentally ill and deserved to be sent to a mental hospital rather than prison. The defense even brought in their own psychiatrist to testify that Bardo suffered from schizophrenia, hoping it would sway the judge. Ultimately, though, it didn't. Bardo was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, he resides in Avenal State Prison, where he will remain until the day he dies. For the friends, colleagues, and loved ones of Rebecca Schaeffer, her murder was one of the most shocking and horrifying events of their lives. The shooting brought the discussion of obsessive fans to the forefront of the entertainment industry. In 1990, California passed the first anti-stalking laws. And yes, as incredibly hard as it is to believe, before 1990, stalking wasn't differentiated from simple harassment. Schaeffer's murder would be the catalyst to change that, and today all 50 states have some form of anti-stalking legislation. In 1994, the Driver's Privacy Protection Act was signed into law. meant to close the loopholes which had allowed the private investigator Bardo hired to obtain Schaeffer's address. The story of Rebecca Schaeffer is tragically an all too familiar one. A promising young talent whose life was snuffed out before she had even gotten to experience her full potential. Much worse than a career not having been worked, though, is a life not having been lived. At 21 years old, Schaeffer had an entire lifetime of experiences yet to come, only to have it all taken away from her at the hands of a delusional fan who decided that she belonged to him, and if he wasn't going to have her, then no one else could either. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.